Right, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 6 o'clock. If we can just make a start. The chair, Councillor Agba, has sent his apologies, so which means we do need to nominate a chair for this meeting. If I can please have nominations, members, please. Thank you.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Emily Coates for the chair position today.
Thank you very much. Seconded. Oh, thank you, Councillor Mead. Okay. Thank you all.
Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Admin and Regulation Committee. Okay, so the meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Attendees are required to wear masks on entry to the building and meeting room, but may remove them when seated. If members and officers could please remember to switch their microphone on when speaking and off when they have finished speaking in the council chamber, and ensure the microphone is positioned near you and speak directly into the microphone. Attendees could all switch off their mobile phones or put them on silent. If you need to take a phone call, please leave the room. And moment. Okay, right, so we've got, and have you got any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillors Agba, S. Hussein, and Councillor Pedersen, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move on to the minutes. So we have minutes from the 5th of May, which is an ordinary meeting of the committee. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes? No? And the 17th of May, we've got the annual council meeting notes. Does anyone have any questions or comments? No, I think everyone's happy with the minutes, so they're fine for me to sign. So the updates. So we have an urgent item under agenda item section 10. Do I need to read this? Section 100B of the Local Government Act. We will take this item at agenda item 5, which is at the start of the agenda. You should have received papers for the urgent item. We are also going to be swapping item number 8 with item number 11. Oh. And item number 9 needs a PowerPoint presentation, so they're going to be joining us online. Perfect. Have we got any disclosures of interest?
Sure, just go to item 3 section.
Sorry. What? So item number 3, section 106, Local Government Finance Act. Those items on the agenda affected by section 106, Local Government Finance Act, we identified at the meeting. Any members so affected are reminded that they should disclose the fact and refrain from voting on those items. So have we got any declarations of interest?
No.
I just had to read that part. Yeah, that's the okay.
Disclosures item.
Perfect. Do I need to read the text?
No disclosures, Chair.
No disclosures. Perfect.
That was moved.
Perfect. So we've got item number 5. I do not have the paper in front of me.
That's the
That's
urgent
fine.
item. It's Sam Freya.
Okay,
And Samantha.
over to Sam and Samantha.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sam Freer, the Electoral Services Manager, and I'm here with my colleague Samantha McKean, who's the Deputy Monitoring Officer, and we invite the committee to declare and give public notice of a casual vacancy in the Dallow ward. Just for information, the returning officer has deemed that the election will take place on the 4th of August this year, and once elected, the post holder will be in place for exactly 9 months until the all-out local elections next May. Thank you.
Yes. Let's move on to the recommendations then. So the recommendation is that the committee declare and give public notice of a casual vacancy in Dallow ward under section 86 and 87D of the Local Government Act. So we're all happy to agree with the recommendation, seeing as we have to. Yes. Perfect. So there is references from committees and any other bodies. There are none.
Chair.
Perfect. So this would be much easier if I have the documents in front of me. Here's item 7. We're on to item number 7, which should be, is it Anne presenting it?
Anne Davis.
Yes, Anne. Anne Davis, go on.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne Davis. I'm the HR Business Manager for HR Strategy. And the report from me this evening is to give you an overview of the Equal Pay Review for 2021. The Council last completed an Equal Pay Review in 2016, crossing across to 2017. And it was due for us to conduct another Equal Pay Review, but the pandemic has put us back from the normal schedule, which would be around about 3 years. However, we've completed that now, and the 2021 review considers pay data for the 12-month period from April 2020 to March 2021. The review considered 4,910 employees. 2,725 of those are what we term centrally employed by the council, and 2,185 are employed by community schools. It is a particular catchment in terms of the data, and teachers are excluded, both teachers centrally employed and teachers within the schools. The overall purpose of a review of this nature is to determine whether there are any significant average differences in base pay between men and women. In addition, and a number of councils do this, this review includes base pay analysis of the protected characteristics for age, disability and race. So we look at more than just male and female. I'm pleased to inform the committee that overall the review provides the council with the necessary assurances around pay equity and to have a timely evidence in the event of any challenges. There is a full report that sits behind the summary report that you have in front of you this evening. That report runs in considerable detail to over 79 pages, and it provides analysis against grade, age, disability, race and sex. However, the full report is not made public in order to comply strictly with the the General Data Protection Regulations of 2018. And that's because on close scrutiny of that full report, in many places within it, it shows only one employee from one of those particular groups compared to the remainder of the comparative group, which means that we can't protect that person's identity. It would be fairly easy to identify them from that report. So the report is restricted to access to the human resources officers that need to act and implement on the recommendations. I'm also pleased to let you know that there are no high risk areas from that report. It was conducted by an external specialist HR consultancy firm, and there are no high risk areas for the council, which is fantastic news, I think, and something that we should be rightly proud of. Skimming then to the key risks in terms of the analysis of the base pay identified, there are a number of areas where there are no risks identified or the risks are very, very low, either in that the differences between pay are very small or that there's only one or two people affected. There are, however, 42 allowances and additional payments included in the review. We have a lot of those at Luton, and that's not uncommon across other councils, a lot of allowances. And those were analysed by gender only. 74% were found to be paid proportionately more to men than women when compared to the council's gender profile, which, as you know, is about 2/3 women, 1/3 men. Each allowance was individually analysed and significant variances explored further. As I said, there are no high risk areas to be concerned about. There are 22 areas of risk. 67% of those are low risk, and many have no recommendations attached, and the remaining 33% are medium risk. So we've worked through all of those recommendations to draw up the action plan, which is attached to the report as well. And we will begin within the HR strategy team working through the fine detail of all of that pay data over the coming months to look carefully into each of those recommendations. That plan will take us through to February 2023. And following that, it may be necessary, it may not, but it may be necessary to draft proposals around changes to employment policies or processes where those challenges around equalities and pay matters could surface. So we'll do some follow-on work after the action plan is complete. And that will lead us round far too swiftly, I suspect, to another equal pay review, which we need to conduct between 2024 and 2025. I won't read verbatim the whole report, but if anybody's got any questions, I'll do my very best to answer them.
Lovely. Do we have any questions? Councillor Keynes.
I've just got a couple of questions, really, just set of information. Page 13, on the list of allowances, there's an honorarium. Now, I've been told that honorariums are disappearing.
No, we do pay honorariums, and we pay those sometimes when somebody's acting up. So there may be a decision not to recruit permanently into a vacant position because there's somebody within a team who's able to act up, if you like, into that higher graded post, and then we pay them the difference between their proper rate of pay and the higher rate of pay. Sometimes people undertake additional duties where it's not a full job that they're undertaking, but they're doing some extra duties on top of their normal job. And then we will assess those through proper job evaluation processes, and we will evaluate the worth of the extra duties that they are doing, and we'll then pay them a top up in terms of pay so that they do those extra duties and they're paid for them.
So I think I heard you say teachers don't come under this.
Teachers aren't included.
The governing body, that honorariums are not allowed anymore.
I don't deal with teachers myself, so I'm not an expert, but in any event, this equal pay review doesn't include teachers at all. So you may well be right in what you're saying there.
The only other one I've got a query is lump sum allowance. What do you have to do to get a lump sum allowance?
Lump sum allowance. It's an old-fashioned term, I guess, but it's an allowance that we pay to people who need their cars on a regular basis in order for them to qualify by travelling around 650 miles around the borough each year. That's the kind of main threshold for getting that allowance. And the allowance is £963 per year, and they get it paid pro rata on a monthly basis. It's a national term and condition under the Green Book for local government employees, essential car user allowance.
Taxable?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out for you. It's paid in their normal pay, so I imagine it would be. It's paid in their normal pay, so I imagine it will be, but I can find that out for you.
Councillor Malik.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for your report. My question is regarding gender pay as well, and part of my question has been answered already. It's about gender pay gap, male and female. And also we're talking about the action plans. So what the specific actions you're going to take in future to minimize this gap between males and females? And also, how can we make this environment more friendly for women to carry on more work and with all the pressure and everything? Thank you.
The gender pay gap analysis is an entirely different piece of work, and you will have received that from myself at this committee earlier in the year. It's an annual statutory requirement for us to publish our gender pay gap. Our gender pay gap at the moment is somewhere in the region of 1%, I believe, from memory. So we are extremely low in terms of our gender pay gap compared to other councils which are really struggling in the double figures. In terms of strategies to bring that down to an absolute level playing field, then the sorts of things that we've introduced over the years are for buying additional leave so that people can balance off their home and work life responsibilities. We have messages throughout our recruitment site in terms of being a flexible employer, so that we operate a flexible a flexi scheme so that people can work harder at certain times and take time back at other times, and that is incredibly useful if you're trying to balance a busy work schedule with getting to your children's plays that are at 11 o'clock in the morning in school, which isn't ideal if you're working full time. But with flexi scheme, you're able to kind of step out of work, go and do that in terms of your family life, and then come back into work a bit later. So we have things of that nature, and I would suggest many other supportive policies in terms of being family friendly. Does that help? Yeah, thank you.
Have we got any other questions? Okay, back to Terry. Go on.
I've got no, I knew I've got no one here. Page 17. This is just for information again. 1, 2, 3. The fourth item down. Base pay by race. EDI coordinators. Who are they and what are they? What's this? Sorry. Page 17. It's the fourth item down in the pay. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a recommendation where the HR external consultants have noticed some slight anomalies in terms of the base pay that we pay to white employees compared to BME, BAME, whatever the terminology we're using at the moment. Now, sometimes that will be perfectly explainable, because if the successful applicant for a job is from a minority ethnic group and they're coming from the private sector, then we might pay them at a higher rate in order to recruit them into the council. Ordinarily, we'd start people at the bottom of the scale. So until we look at the data closely for individuals, the posts that they're in, why they're getting paid a particular rate of pay compared to other colleagues from a different race, then we're not going to be able to determine whether or not there's something systemically wrong, or whether it's just a fact of life in the way that we've recruited people and the race for those people that we've recruited.
Seems a bit of a dodgy policy to me. It could be misinterpreted all along the line, couldn't it?
Policy, this is an analysis of people's pay. So what the action plan seeks to achieve is to look at where there's any discrepancies between pay and to find the reasons that sit behind those discrepancies. The reasons might be perfectly natural in terms of the recruitment process. If you have only white applicants that apply for a job, then you're only going to appoint a white person at the end of that process. But if there are any anomalies that we can't explain in that way, then that's where we need to kind of dig a bit deeper and work out whether there is something going wrong, whether we need to have a specific policy to make sure that nothing untoward happens within our pay system.
Have we got any further questions? No. Perfect. Oh. Go on.
I haven't got any questions, but I'm making the observation that I'm understanding that this is still work in progress and there's hopefully a report in February. So I'm thinking that we ought to ask you to come back to the committee when that work is complete and give us an update on how things are going. I don't know whether that can be worked into the schedule of things. I'm looking at the desk up there, and
I think that sounds entirely sensible, and I would suggest perhaps March of next year, which will take us past the end of the action plan for all of those various recommendations. I'm saying that because the February meeting is normally a really busy one, where you will see me again going through pay policy, foundation living wage, all of those gender pay gaps. So the February meeting is normally extremely busy. I would suggest that it might fall better on the March meeting next year, but I agree, I think that would be very sensible.
Okay, perfect. Right, so we're on to the recommendation. The recommendation is that we note the report. We're happy to note the report. Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Let you get situated. We are on to item 8, which is which is now bereavement services additional posts. We're over to Alex Green.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, committee.
We are on what was item 11, bereavement services.
This report seeks the approval to increase the resources within the bereavement services team in relation to grave digging and operational maintenance of the Vale. The committee is recommended to approve the 2 additional L3 cemetery operatives within the bereavement services. Funding has been approved through the 2022-2023 budget setting process. The background, the bereavement services have operated with a very small operational team of actually 1 foreperson and only 3 operatives. Recent numbers, I can quote them back from 2016, but the burial rate back in 2016 was 431. Last year, it rose to 619. Business intelligence tells us that the trend will continue with more burials happening within Luton. Without these resources, these additional staff, we will struggle to maintain the standards, the health and safety, and the expectations that the public have come to expect from the Vale. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Do we have any questions on the report? No? Any comments? Yeah, Councillor Mead.
I take it this has gone through the budgetary process and this money is available if we do vote it through. Or how? Yes, yeah, leave it at that. Has it gone through the budgetary process and is the money there if we vote it through?
Have we got any other questions or comments? No? Perfect. So the recommendation is that this committee is recommended to approve the 2 additional level 3 cemetery operatives within bereavement services. Yeah, are we all happy to agree with the recommendation? Yes. Perfect. Right, thank you, Alex. That was short and sweet. So we move on to item number 9, which is I'm slightly confused. Apparently, we are on to neighbourhood services and housing management realignment, and we're over to Sarah. Sarah Hall.
Sorry, I think we were going back to the original item number 9, which was the unmet demand survey. Neighbourhood services is moving to 11. And we have a number of people in the gallery who came to see this item, so I think it's important we hear this one now.
Right, let's move on to Hackney Carriage Unmet Demand Survey, and we'll move back to the other one at the end. Yeah. So, item 9, Hackney Carriage Unmet Demands, and it's over to Tony Island. We should have a presentation for this one, shouldn't we?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you have Ian Millership online, who will join us in a moment once I've done the sort of intro. You've been circulated the presentation. Matt, I believe you have the presentation to present. And we'll do Ian will ask you to move on the slides as and when necessary. So thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the report regards to the Hackney Carriage Unmet Demand Survey. As I'm sure you're aware, this comes around every 3 to 4 years. The council is required, if it wishes to retain a limit on the numbers of Hackney carriage licences, it is required to undertake a survey to see whether there is any unmet demand. On that basis, a survey and report were undertaken in 2019, prior to all of the upset with the pandemic. And having discussed this with our consultant, obviously we do need to have a current assessment by yourselves with regards to the unmet demand. And really at the moment, as we return to what will be a new normal, the data that we have from 2019 is really the only data that we can rely on at this point in time, considering, as you'll hear, that obviously the unmet demand dropped even further than is detailed in the report during the pandemic, and is only now starting to increase. So the matters raised in the report are the most positive situation with regards to unmet demand, and you'll note and you'll hear from the consultant in a moment that actually that survey is assessed to indicate that there is no significant unmet demand. On that basis, you have three options available to you, which is to basically maintain a limit. You could, after hearing all the facts today, you could decide that there would be a managed process to release additional plates. If so, I would need to bring another matter back to you with regards to the conditions and the fees and the administrative process if you were to do that. Or you can say, well, actually, we'll remove the limit altogether. But obviously, you'll hear from the consultant in a moment what the actions are within his reports. But basically, obviously, I would ask you to consider the report that's presented in front of you today, the actual unmet demand survey, which you've had circulated out to you. And I will now hand over to Ian Millership from LVSA, and obviously ask Matt to present and allow Ian to go through the key data with you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Matt, do you want to go to the next slide?
Ian, if you're trying to talk, we're not hearing you this end. I don't know if it doesn't look like you're on mute.
No, can you hear at all? I'm not on mute this end. Hello?
We may need to ask him to dial back in, I think. Ian, if you can hear us, if you don't mind trying to dial back in, and we'll come back to you in a moment.
Yeah, will do.
In the meantime, are there any questions that spring to mind from members with regards to this whilst we wait for Ian to come in?
Councillor Keynes.
I'll say something just to fill the time in. I've actually been contacted by some taxi drivers who are a bit concerned about the whole situation. They're claiming that, and I think they're right, that the footfall has not gone up.
No.
In point of fact, it's even gone down in some places. And they're really asking, and I have to take your views on this, that we just leave the whole thing for another year, refer it back.
Yeah, the risk with that, councillor, is that we won't have a current assessment. If we don't have a current assessment, it leaves, in effect, for want of a better expression, the door opened to anybody to then apply for a licence. So with your decision today, and you'll hear from, hopefully in a moment, from the consultant, that the recommendation is that we would look to pull back the timeline slightly, probably looking at doing a next survey towards the end of 2023 or early 2024 to then get the current picture at that point. But I think the key thing to state today, that to maintain a limit, whatever you decide, then you need to make a decision ideally today on that, so that we can maintain that. If not, it's in that the effect of that is to basically lift the limit and allow free trade, in effect, for anybody wishing to apply for a licence. So I recognise the concerns from the trade, but obviously on the basis, and I won't preempt what the consultant's going to say to you, but on the basis of the information in the report, it indicates there is no significant unmet demand. So obviously one of the key options available to you today is to say you will keep the limit, and you may then say, well, actually, yes, we'd like to see another survey being undertaken end of 2023. So that would be down to yourselves today. To take no action leaves it open, I suppose, is the easiest synopsis.
Councillor Malik.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions to Tony. Tony, the first one is about, when you say the significant of unmet demand, ISUD is based on 165 active vehicles. So what do you suggest about the other 5 vehicles? We're going to keep them, or we're going to reduce them, and what will this reduction of these 5 vehicles going to impact on other services, public?
So, yeah, the key thing, as you'll see from the figures there, we have in effect got a limit of 170 cap number on the vehicles currently, but we have actually only licensed in place for 165. You'll hear from the consultant, you'll have already seen on the slides that there is the option to reduce that, to go to the 165. Having said that, you'll be aware of the developments at the airport with the fact that we've now got a significant number of the Hackneys that are serving the airport again, which is all good news. So I think we need to, you'll need to balance that out on the basis that actually, do you want to keep those, in effect, those 5 licenses in your back pocket? Because obviously if you then find in the interim period that you have got an unmet demand on the public ranks, say for instance in the town centre, then we could release those additional 5 licenses to pick up that slack. So I think, yeah, hopefully if we can hear from Ian in a moment, and I don't know, Ian, if you can hear us and if you're able to speak, then hopefully he'll be able to clarify that as he goes through his presentation. But you said you might have got another question as well.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony, for your clarification. In my personal opinion, we should keep these 5 vehicles because we are anticipating more work at the airport in future. But that's my personal opinion. It's up to members.
I preempted that, so.
Yeah. So my other questions is, the survey they carried on by LVSA. Yeah. Do you think it's credible? And were all the stakeholders taken on board? And that was happening in 2019. That was 3 years ago. So are you satisfied with that? Do you think the survey is still, is satisfactory for us if we can make any decision today? So that, yeah.
Too early. I think the issue is this is our one key sort of fixed point in time where we have reliable data before everything went a bit skew-if. And obviously there was a massive impact on the trade, and obviously footfall, vanished overnight virtually because everybody having to stay at home. So actually this is our one key fixed point in time. For us to do a survey today would probably not be advisable because again we're in this shift to new normal. We've got the other aspects of the fact that the airport is developing and we're seeing a shift of vehicles to the airport. We're in the process of looking to adopt that rank so that it can be considered within future unmet demand survey, because any private ranks can't be considered. And I'm sure Ian will expand on that when he comes to do his presentation. So we're in a state of flux at the moment. So in effect, if the authority wishes to maintain a limit, then actually that data in the report is our most reliable data. And as I think I've said in the papers there, we would be able to defend that decision should we be challenged.
Just ask one more question. Sorry.
I was going to suggest we move on to the presentation.
Have we allowed for
go ahead.
The dart? Any spaces for the dart?
That will be another factor of transition. Obviously, we'll have to monitor to see what's happening with the dart. Obviously, Hackneys do serve the Parkway station and do quite a bit of work between Parkway and the airport. The dart will obviously impact on that. Obviously, people also use the buses as well at the moment. So actually, that's another element of flux that we would want to see, and which is why really what we're saying is we'd be looking to do another survey late 23 to actually pick up, and hopefully that will have stabilised so we get a true picture again. We're very much in this, everything's moving at the moment. So anything we try to do at the moment is very difficult. That one fixed period of time which the survey was conducted is reliable. So that's just why we're bringing it to you.
Okay, that seems like a good point to try and move on to the presentation, and we'll take more questions afterwards. Is Ian now ready?
I hope. Can you hear me now?
No.
Hello?
Yeah, he's flashing like he's talking.
Hello? Yes, I don't know what's happening here because I'm not on mute.
You're not on mute.
No.
No.
I guess if you held your mobile phone up, I can sort of hear myself at the other end, but I don't know. The other option is just to perhaps, I mean, I have talked this through quite a bit with Tony. He is very well aware of the content of the slides. Yeah.
Yeah, what I can do, put my phone on speaker near the microphone, and we've done this before, and you can just speak.
Yeah.
And everybody will hear you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay.
Right.
All
Okay.
right, you can go ahead now, Ian.
Thank you. Right, it's good to be here and able to speak with you, even though it's from a distance. I'll try and put up with hearing myself in a strange way. If I can go to the next slide, please. Just to say, the first thing, the way these surveys work, they're based on a thing called the best practice guidance, which the government is currently reviewing and revising. But there's no current plans to change the way things are done in regards to unmet demand surveys. But those surveys, the guidance there says they should be done every 3 years, and the shelf life of a survey that's been done is normally counted to be 3 years. So, in essence, the current survey. Hello. Right. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Now that makes it a bit easier.
Now we have feedback. Here.
Matt, I think it might be Eunice's speaker. So you might need to lift it up a bit. It seemed a bit better when you were speaking to him almost to your ear.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Ian, speak on.
Is that okay? Right. Okay. So I'll have to switch the other way when there are questions, because otherwise I can't hear. As I was saying, the normal shelf life of a survey in normal circumstances would be 3 years. So in essence, you know, this survey would normally be valid for 3 years in any event. We know that the world has completely changed and there's been a lot of change in between. We are now doing surveys again, although some of the early ones we've done have thrown up quite complex issues. But the councils that have done those surveys wanted to make sure they picked up on things like that. So I will take you through what we've done and then I can take questions after. Just to set the context and tell you exactly when things were done, the start of the last survey was September 2019. Public consultations with people in the street were done in October and December of that year. The blank surveys were in September. Consultation with the trade was within October and November, done by an online survey. And obviously we're now at the committee today. Consultation with key stakeholders was undertaken through that period. One of the things we have found with key stakeholders is that they very rarely are particularly significant to the process. And if any key stakeholder has an issue with provision of taxi services, they're normally bending the ear of the licensing authority well before we go and talk to them. But most of the time, people don't bother to respond because our work isn't statutory. They don't have to respond, and if there's no problems, they don't. But if they do have issues with taxis, they would tell us. But you'll see where we were with that as we go on. Next slide, please. So the way that Tony and I view this, and as a consultant in this field, I would concur that this is a complete and thorough review undertaken well in advance of any impacts of the pandemic. It is a review and test of the policy for the situation as in the autumn of 2019, but that was a very critical time for the trade in any event, because it was at a time when the airport contract had been away from being serviced by the bulk of the Hackney carriage trade for nearly 3 years, so that would have settled down. Overall, you've always undertaken, you have managed plate releases from 2004 till 2013, and then after that, that was set to 0. The fleet had been at 170 until at the time of the 2019 survey, it had gone back down to 165. And as you can see there, your normal policy review has been every 3 years, 19, 16, 13, was a little bit less before that. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, 165 Hackney carriages at the time the bank surveys were undertaken and through the time that the survey was done. That number limit you have there since at least 1994. Managed growth for the years from 04 to 13. At the time of the survey, there were 938 private hire vehicles. That number has reduced through the pandemic. All the Hackney carriage fleet are wheelchair accessible. Again, that's a long-standing policy you have. Marginally reduced levels of double shifting since the last survey. Overall driver levels have reduced from the peak of 1900 in 2007, and that's continued right the way through, and into the pandemic that's continued. There's a high level of licensed vehicles in total in the area, but mainly they're private hire, and some of that is because there are contracts with other places that the private hire is service. The pandemic has hit private hire hard. I checked the DFT statistics that are available for March 2020, March 2021. While the number of Hackney carriages has stayed firmly at 165, private hires have gone down. And by the 2021 DFT survey, the proportion of the fleet that was Hackney carriage had gone up from 15% at the time of the survey to 17% in 2021. One thing that needs to be said is that provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles is focused on the Hackney carriage fleet. There's very few in the private hire fleet. So if someone phones a private hire operator that isn't a mixed fleet operator, they will have to find a Hackney carriage to help them out with that. That is quite normal around the country. Since the study, 68 plates have returned to servicing the airport rank. Well, that's quite a high proportion. Next slide, please. The 2019 surveys, the head of the Wellington Street rank had been made more visible by moving it round into George Street. There were 2 new ranks introduced in Silver Street and between the station and central area, although those weren't particularly well used in our survey. The airport change actually did find 16 Hackney carriage drivers had gone into the new arrangement, but the rest had all returned and come back into mainly servicing the town centre. We watched the ranks for a total of 618 hours, and out of that 618, 38% saw no activity at all, 14% saw occasional quiet activity by Hackney carriages or passengers, but 48% of them were busy with both Hackney carriages and passengers. And in fact, we didn't find any hour across the 3 days we covered that didn't have somebody using a taxi at a rank somewhere in Luton. We also found in this survey there was a good compliance with rank markings by other vehicles, particularly the reduction. There was a strong reduction in private hire abuse of ranks. That had been a historic issue in Luton until 2016. In 2019, it took on significantly down. There was, however, car abuse at ranks had gone up from 4% to 8% in 2019, although, as I say, overall, there was better compliance with rank markings than there had been. The question as to why things have improved in terms of overall usage of ranks could be because these extra former airport vehicles had to serve the central ranks. They got nowhere else to go. And we see in the results of the survey that appears to be shown in several places. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the average patronage we calculated for a typical week was 17% down from the survey we did 3.5 years earlier. However, when we took the airport out and recalculated the statistics, there was actually a 14% growth in average weekly patronage. So the fact you've got more planes working in the centre and not going to the airport actually led to more people using taxis in the central area. Park Street got 30% of demand. The Airport Parkway got 23% of all typical weekly demand, and Luton Station 18%. Wellington Street and Manchester Street increased their passenger shares, which we think is because more vehicles were there servicing them. However, when we worked out the number of rank-based trips per vehicle per day, it comes out at 6, which, if you try to make a living on 6 jobs a day, it's not going to work, which is why a lot of the Hackney carriages do a lot of private work and do a lot of work from radios as well. So they only make ends meet by pre-bookings. Over the 3 survey days, we saw 70% of the fleet is quite a high level. And the level of unmet demand that we observed was very low. As already been intimated, it was the lowest we've seen in any of your surveys. We also found that the usage of the wheelchair accessible facility in the 2019 survey was much higher, with 7 people seen using them in Park Street, 2 at the Airport Parkway, and 1 each at George Street, Luton Station, and Manchester Street. So that means people with wheelchairs were getting a good service. Interestingly, we also took the patronage of people coming out of railway stations, and at Luton Airport Parkway, 5.5% of all the passengers leaving that station carried their onward journeys by taxi. And at Luton Station, it was 4.7%. So that's quite an important contribution of the taxis to getting people away from the stations, and presumably, if they weren't doing it by taxi, they might drive instead. So that's a very good thing. Next slide, please. We undertook 250 questionnaires with people on the streets. We did include Leagrave, and we included some people at night. We found in the results that there was marginally less recent usage of licensed vehicles. There was a smaller reduction in overall usage. Across the last 3 surveys, the average usage of all vehicles, that's private hire and Hackney carriage, was 4.8 in 2013, 3.5 in 2016, and 3.2 in 2019. At the Hackney carriage level was 0.4 trips per person, and that was the same as in the previous survey, so that was constant. We found in this survey that 9% of people told us they got a taxi by using an app. And there was 1 national and 2 local company apps mentioned at that time. So the local companies having apps was actually getting some good effect. And the experience of people from those surveys was that they said using local licensed vehicles was very good. So that's a very good thing, and the trade should be applauded for providing a good service. And the need for a wheelchair accessible vehicle appeared to have been increased marginally. And we saw that because more people were actually using that. Next slide, please. Key stakeholders. As normal, we get very little response from these despite trying. Most of the stakeholders told us that their customers were mainly booked taxis. In other words, they used private hire or they booked hackney carriages. And most of the knowledge about ranks was for night demand. That's a pretty typical response. There were no problems or issues raised by those stakeholders whatsoever. Next, please. We talked to the trade, and the trade response for 2019 was lower than in 2016. About 4% of the people invited to respond gave us answers. There were more private hire responded this time than in the previous time. The proportion is of the total trade, not just of the hackney carriage trade. So the proportion of the hackney carriage trade would almost certainly be higher. The average working week we found was 43 hours for hackney carriages and 35 for private hire, which was slightly down from the levels of 2016. There was a very significant move between 2016 and 2019 of people owning their own vehicles and using them solely themselves. There were 85% of those that we talked to wanted to retain the limit. And that, of course, includes quite a large number of private hire, some of which, as is typical, said, could we have a limit on private hire, which is legally not possible. There were, however, 2 hackney carriages who opposed the limit on the number of vehicles. But again, that's very small compared to everything else. And when we asked people, how do you think the limit benefits the public? They said, well, it reduces pollution because there's less vehicles providing the service, and it reduces congestion because there's less vehicles hanging around. Obviously, the demand of 6 per day means that quite a lot of vehicles do wait around quite a lot of the time to get their business. Next slide, please. So 2 slides of key conclusions. The first one is we didn't find any evidence of any significant unmet demand whatsoever. And in fact, the value of the ISUD value was very low. And all but one element of that equation had reduced in its value. On that basis, there's no need for any more plates. Than to say, if we'd have presented that without the pandemic happening, that you could have quite happily reduced 170 to 165, even if there was more demand appeared. There was plenty of spare capacity in there for them to meet that without any problems, because the ISUD value was so small, it was almost negative, almost zero. The results were definitely consistent with the focusing of hackney carriages on the central area ranks away from the airport previous honeypot. It was clear that that was having a positive impact. This benefits the public and reduces the temptation to use or call for private hire where ranks exist. That's one of the things that had happened before, that there weren't enough hackneys near the ranks, so people found private hire, and there were other reasons people used private hire there as well. More hackney carriage in the area, even despite the growth in apps. As we've already said, 5% of station onward transport for 2 of the stations was by hackney carriage. But the rank patronage is very low overall. I return to that 6 passengers per day per driver, which again still means there's plenty of vehicles available to cope with growth at the point we did that work. So, as I did say, you could have at that point reduced the limit by 5 plates, but there is need to take account of the 68 that have now gone back since that time to servicing the airport. They don't do that full time, but obviously that will have reduced the number in the central area. And you also have to think about what happens when the new rail link comes in, because that will displace some Hackney carriages who get nearly a quarter of their demand from Airport Parkway Station. A lot of them will come back into the city centre when the DART switches on and they find people are using that instead of Hackney carriages. Next slide, please. We also need to be aware if the return of those plates to the airport produces any unbalanced service to the central area ranks as you move forward. There doesn't seem any evidence of that at the moment that anyone's heard of, but that does need to be watched by yourselves, the licensing authority, and perhaps reported on if that is causing a problem. So I'm therefore suggesting the latest you could have a new demand survey would be with rank work in September 2024, but it may be more sensible to aim for that in September 2023, and to keep away people from thinking that they might be able to be cheeky and come in and try and snaffle a few plates by saying you haven't got a valid survey. We would perhaps recommend the decision to have another survey starting in September 2023 should be made sooner rather than later, so that people are aware exactly what the situation is. Because in theory, your current survey would become out of date by this time next year. The other thing, as I'm saying, is perhaps you might need to consider an interim review, not the full survey, if significant impacts do appear, either from DART, the airport, or any other changes for that matter, anything arising from the pandemic as you come out of that. There is, as I said, a new best practice guidance being consulted on. The consultation for that finishes very shortly. One of the things in there is encouraging local authorities to look at the overall accessibility of their Hackney carriage and private hire fleet. And I don't think it would be a very big piece of work for you as an authority to consider that over the next year or so, because a lot of the information is already available and that could be done fairly promptly and feed into any ideas where you go with your next demand survey. And also the new best practice guidance is talking about the need for people to actually review rank provision. But I don't think you need to do that because you have been doing that regularly, and it wouldn't take much to make sure that your ranks were still relevant. You've been very good at doing that. And I think that is the final slide. So at that point, I shall put my speaker on, put my phone down, and take any questions and then come back and answer those questions if I can. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Ian. Have we got any questions on the presentation first off? Quite possibly, but it sounds like there might not be many questions for him. Have we got any questions on? Okay, right, okay. So no questions on the presentation. Right.
Chair, I know it's your discretion. It's completely up to you if you let me speak or not. But I have a comment at the end, not questions, but a comment to make to the members.
Any more questions first, and I'll let you have a comment at the end.
Going to have a comment about DART, but I think that comes at the end.
Okay.
Because we're talking about something we don't know anything about at the moment, aren't we, on DART? It's a non. Whatever.
You can make your comment now if you want. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that if can we make sure that when DART gets going, if it ever gets going, we get regular reviews on this? Because I really don't want us to have a problem between Parkway and DART. I don't think there will be a problem, but
I think you're quite right, Lee. I think we do need to monitor it. dependent on when it gets into full flow. Will depend. Obviously, we've heard about the dates potentially going forward about doing an assessment in 2023. So actually, it's not that far away. So that might be the point. If I think if we see that there was a significant shift, i.e., that those vehicles that were previously servicing Parkway are coming into the town centre, we've already heard that the patronage is relatively low. And obviously there will have been that shift for those vehicles that were previously in the town centre, which are going back to doing some of the airport work. So I think we'll monitor it to see, and we'll obviously be in liaison with the trade themselves to see how things pan out, if there's the need to do that. And I think Ian's already mentioned there that there might be a need for a little bit of work on the basis of the new best practice guidance regards to accessibility. We could always add some additional questions or some additional review on the back of that. But no, take your point and we'll monitor it going forward. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Malik first. No.
Comments. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. From this presentation, we got more information, and it's clearly states a lot of things. What I gather from this presentation and from this report, that this report clearly highlights that there is no significant unmet demand, and the retention can be justified and defended. So just a small question, when you say can be justified and defended in court, what is that supposed to mean, and how the risk will go in future? Who can challenge, and what we need to do?
So basically the situation is that, as with any license, anybody can apply at any time for any license. That's their right. This, in effect, if you decide to maintain the limit, then becomes our policy, and a reasoned policy as to why we've decided that there is a limit put in place, and the reason for that is the unmet demand. Any application then coming in for a hackney carriage vehicle will be assessed against that policy position, which is, if you decide to keep the limit today, will obviously be against that limit. Any application will be heard, and it will go to the taxi and private hire panel, and they will obviously consider that in line with the policy decision that you make today, basically. So it doesn't tie the hands of anybody wanting to make an application, but as with all licenses, they are considered against the relevant policy at the time, and the decision makers will review that in light of that policy.
So thank you very much, Tony, for your answering. So after the pandemic, we already know that this trade is already going through a very difficult time. So, and before that, they were already having a tough time because of that contract and stuff. So I personally would go for option 1. Thank you.
Before we move on to discussing the options, I'm happy for Councillor Abbas to come in, make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you giving me way. I mean, it was something that Councillor Keys picked up from Councillor Keys in the beginning there. I think it'd be a bad idea to do nothing. I think if you want to do something, go with option 1 and do the survey start of September 2024, as is recommended by, I believe it's Ian. The reasons being, I mean, all of us know how the hackney trade and our private hire trade has been affected with COVID. Coming out of COVID now, I agree with Tony, is on an increase, but it's on an increase coming out of COVID, not on the increase that's coming out of the 2019 figures of 9,358. So, I mean, we need to be careful. And the other thing, important thing is to consider why I recommend that you choose option 1 is the fuel cost at the minute is hitting £2 a litre, or top £2 a litre at petrol stations. Cost of living is another issue, and maybe within months we'll be going into recession as well. And these all drivers have to earn money and, pay for their families and their vehicles as well. And as only the other day we were talking about climate change. Why would members tonight want to add more vehicles, add more pollution to Luton at this current time? So I reckon option 1, surveys to start in September 2024. That falls in line with your Councillor Keane's, your DART will be up and running then. I mean, Tony and Sarah will have good figures. Plus the airport will be up and running at that time as well. So it put us in a better place coming out of cost of living, fuel cost, recession by that time. That is my recommendation to the members. And thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me way.
Okay, thank you. Right, so shall we move on to discussing the options? I think Councillor Manick suggested he was in favour of option 1. That's what I was going to move on to. Option 1 would also be my preference. So, sorry, I don't know what the correct wording is. I propose we go for option 1, but what's the correct terminology I'm supposed to use? Can I propose we go for option 1? Was everyone be in favour of option 1? That would be retaining the existing limit. Yes, everyone's in favour of retaining the existing limit. Okay. Do we need to give you a steer of when we'd like the next one to be completed?
Say if you want to go, I think the earlier date, I know Councillor Abbas has mentioned 24, but I think the actual earlier date was September 23. If
presentation,
there was 2 dates,
the
there was
later
a later
date,
one, which
yeah,
was early 24. Yeah. So if you bearing in mind the presentation from Ian, you can give me a steer if you wish regards to one of those dates. From a expert sort of opinion with regards to the fact that we've had this delay bringing the survey to you anyway, it would seem to make sense to bring this back a bit so that we try and get back into the sequence again. So maybe the earlier date would be the better one, but that's just my view. Obviously, the decision is down to you today.
Okay. So any members of the committee want to give a steer whether they have a preference of dates? Councillor Keane, Councillor Malik?
We should get a better bill. I'm sorry to keep labouring Dart,
but pushing it later could also give a better feel of how that, if it's transitioned. So. Okay. Okay. Shall we provisionally look at doing it in autumn 23? But that obviously may move.
I can always bring it back to you, Chair, if it looks like things are still very unsettled. Then of course I can come back with a short item to this committee to seek decision on that. So more than happy. I
think that would be sensible. And as we are very thin on the ground this evening. But right.
So, Chair, are we agreeing September 2023? Is that?
I think we are agreeing that it will come back. Tony will bring it back.
September 2023.
Yes, but we'll bring it back to get that approved. Okay, is that fine with you? That's why I'm thinking that when it's to be reassessed, it needs to come back.
Yeah, no, I'll make a note of that.
Yes, it's okay, Chair, because I mean you're within your right to make that decision. We have a quorum of 3 members and we have 4 members here, so
But
shouldn't be a
I
problem.
think the date of the next one,
Yeah.
if we can bring that back at a later date. Sorry, right, I need to go through the recommendations. So we've considered the content, we've chosen an option. Do I just need to then request that we support the action plan? Have we covered the first two?
Yeah, Chair, if I may, it was just really those key listing points about, you know, those items that Ian listed. So I think the main provision for the committee today is that the decision of the option, and obviously you've kindly given me a steer with regards to bringing the item back when we do the next survey.
And you're happy, we've chosen an option. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Ian, for joining us for the presentation. I don't know if you can actually hear us.
I will certainly pass on your thanks.
Yes, thank you. But we also are back to Tony for item number 10, which is licensed vehicle emission standards.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, this is an item for information. Some of you will be aware, and you were present at the previous meeting, it was almost this time last year. We brought an item to you with regards to the mid-size Hackney carriage vehicle conditions. And on the back of that discussion, there was a request for information about the emission standards, because I think there was some concerns regards to the certainly the Hackney carriage fleet and how they were performing on the Euro standards. And I gave a commitment to bring back a report with regards to Hackney carriage fleet. But for completeness, I have also included the data for private hire vehicles as well. So you'll hopefully the report is self-explanatory. So you'll see certainly with regards to Hackney carriages that there's been a significant improvement with regards to the performance against the Euro standards. Looking at the data there, we're now 47% of the Hackney carriage fleet is now Euro 5 and above, which is obviously a significant change from when we had this assessment initially done in 2018. And actually just to update you with regards to the position with the electric Hackney carriage vehicles, at the time of writing the report that had gone up to 9, we actually now have 15 electric Hackney carriage vehicles. So I think one of the comments that was made by one of the members who's, I don't think is here today, was to understand the commitment from the trade, certainly the Hackney carriage trade, with regards to the standards and the emissions. I think that clearly, I hope you'd agree, that clearly demonstrates that commitment and investment that is being put in, especially given the current financial climate. If I move on to private hire vehicles, also there, you'll see that obviously there is a significant difference because the positioning in regards to the Euro standards to start off with. But again, pretty much all the Euro 2 and Euro 3 vehicles have almost vanished from the listing there. So actually all the private hire vehicles are Euro 4 and above. And so again, it's an improving situation, albeit that we have a slightly lower number of private hire vehicles than we did when we did the assessment in 2018. So I think that's probably the key highlights of the report. Happy to take any questions, but I'm hoping that it is pretty self-explanatory and the data is there to support members. One of the elements that we, on the back of this, that we were looking to do is to bring an item to you with regards to a temporary change of policy with regards to vehicle age to try and incentivise owners to go to higher Euro standards. So in consultation with the trade, we'll be looking to see if we can give an extra year. So first year of licensing will be up to 6 years rather than 5 years, which actually put an advantage against other licensing authorities. So that may help incentivise, but that is a separate matter, and I'll be looking to potentially bring that back to you on a future meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, if you can bring that back. That's really good to hear about the increase in electric Hackneys to 15. Have we got any questions? Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to the electric vehicles, is the council helping out in establishing charging points around the town, which these taxis can plug into, as it were? Is the plug used on private hire different than the ones used on private cars? Like if we put charging stations around, are we going to find a lot of private motorists coming along and charging up their cars on them, and the poor old taxis can't get in, sort of thing?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a good question. It is a challenge. It's a challenge that all authorities are having. So the connection for these vehicles are the same. Doesn't matter whether it's a Hackney carriage, a private hire, or a private vehicle, or a commercial electric van, either pure electric or plug-in hybrid. So one of the challenges that we have is that the fact that unfortunately private users try and use those rapid charging points. We have 4 of them across the borough to support the Hackney carriage trade, and in the going forward will be private hire trade. But basically, yes, we are finding that out of district vehicles are using the licensed vehicles are using them, and also private owners are using them. So we are currently undertaking a range of enforcement options around those people that are using those. I think the situation is improving, but it is an ongoing battle with regards to, obviously, the numbers of electric vehicles are increasing. We are liaising with the highways team on this. One, to look to see whether there's any other options about additional funding for rapid chargers going forward for the licensed trade, but also to see how we can manage these charging points, in particular with regards to a potentially new contract with a provider. And yeah, I'm going to say charging, but the fees for using those columns to charge. So that's being, I think, negotiated or considered at the moment through our highways team. So hopefully, again, that will be another development, and we may be able to look at other options about how we can restrict those points to the use of those licensed vehicles for the borough. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge, to be fair, but it's one that everybody suffers on because everybody has the same socket. Thank you.
There we go. Could it be done through an app or something like that? We seem to have apps for everything. The private hire vehicle has an app which activates the charger, and hopefully nobody else gets their hands on those apps.
It's something we're happy to speak to colleagues about. As you say, there seems to be an app for everything nowadays. But yeah, I think once we have a specific provider that will support these charging points going forward, then obviously we will have somebody fixed that we can liaise with and look at the options about how we can, maximise usage of those for the people who should be using those.
Thank you. Councillor Malik.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question, Tony. With the current rush and speed, how long is that going to take to all the cars to no emission cars and electronic and the Euro 6? How long will that going to take?
That will be part of a larger review, and obviously part of that emissions and climate change piece, which obviously is being considered across the authority. So we are drafting an emissions-based provision, so looking to move away from age of vehicle to emission standards. So we are in the process of devising that policy, but obviously that will need to dovetail in to the overall strategy for the authority going forward. For instance, there's no point of us deciding that actually town centre they can be Euro 5, but actually the overall strategy is that actually with a clean air zone or whatever, that actually it's got to be Euro 6 or electric only. That will be working against us each other. So that will be considered in line. But I would hope that going forward with the number of policy reviews, we'll be able to bring that back to you to consider that broader emissions-based licensing policy rather than an age-based, which hopefully will then give a very clear timeline as to when we would expect these lower Euro vehicles to fall away and the newer vehicles to come on. And obviously with the decision last year with the mid size vehicles, that will be a consideration going forward as well for the trade. So hopefully that will give a range of options, but will also allow us to progress that climate change and the emissions provisions going forward.
Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. So we are recommended to note the details in the report and also to set a date for next date for a review report to be submitted to the committee. How often do we think we would want to report on this? It seems like people want to see how we're doing in terms of licensed vehicle emissions. Would something annual be sufficient? What do we think this time next year?
I'm happy to do that, and I think that was the sort of inference from the last committee hearing, that the first one would be 6 months and then it would be annual thereafter. I might be wrong, but I think that was the general feeling.
I think
from
that would be sensible. I can't see that there'd be too much movement in 6 months for it to be
no, and again,
a 6 monthly report.
We will need to arrange that assessment through the Energy Saving Trust to do that. So
exactly.
Again, we might be pushing the luck if we try and get them to do it every 6 months.
No, I think probably same time next year would probably be sensible.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We are now moving on to neighbourhood services with Sarah Hall. And thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
So, Sarah.
Thank you. So, Sarah Hall, Service Director, Neighbourhood Services. I also have Colin Moon, who's the Service Director for Housing, because the matter that we're speaking to you about today spans both of our divisions. So I hope that the report that's been provided fully explains the proposals that we're asking you to consider. But just in summary, the senior management restructure, which took place at the end of 2020 and early 2021, moved responsibility for the private sector housing function from my division, which is neighbourhood services, to Colin's division, which is the housing services division. This OCA seeks to make formal the line management arrangements for two specific members of staff who have responsibility for private sector housing, but also have responsibility for some teams within my division. So the proposal has been, all staff affected by the proposal have been consulted. And so two members of staff the proposal will move them directly into the housing division. 3 members of staff that remain within neighbourhood services will have minor amendments made to their job descriptions, mainly around their line management, and 1 member of staff will absorb additional management for some additional teams. So as I said, all staff that were affected were consulted, the unions were informed, and we followed the organisational change procedure throughout. The proposals before you have been shared with the staff affected. There are no expected redundancies. There are sufficient roles for all the staff that are affected, and there are no changes in pay for those staff that are affected either. If you do choose to accept these recommendations, I would like to add a further recommendation that should have been included in the report, and that's just basically a housekeeping recommendation that should these proposals be accepted, we will need to ask the monitoring officer to update the constitution to reflect where responsibility for private sector housing sits. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on the OCA or the proposals?
No. No, okay. It sounds like we don't have any questions for you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, so in that case, are we moving on to the recommendations? We all read the recommendations. Because there's quite a lot to read out. That's what I was going to say. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? I'm happy to agree the recommendations. Yes?
Chair,
Including the additional recommendation that Sarah, Sarah's added, which is regarding the Constitution and the monitoring officer. Yes? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for staying for that. So, we're up to our final item, and that's draft work programme.
Thank you, Chair. I should have said at the start, Eunice, I'm so sorry. Jodie Yandel sent her apologies for this meeting, so I'm going to cover the work programme. So in terms of the next meeting on the 13th of July, I believe we had Family Partnership Service OCA listed for that one. Now, I've been informed that they're aiming for committee on the 5th of September for that one. So that item needs to move to the 5th of September in terms of the work programme. For the 13th of July, you should have the social media policy and the work-related stress and employee wellbeing policy, which I've notified committee services of. We're on a deadline, I believe, next week to give titles for that particular committee. And it's a little uncertain whether those two policies will make it to the 13th of July committee, but we'll meet the deadline in terms of confirming titles. On the basis that those two policies may not be presented, there may be no items for the 13th of July, as far as I can see, unless committee services know of any other ones. But I will confirm on those two policies. 5th of September, then, there's the polling district and the Family Partnership Service OCA that I've just mentioned. 29th of September has Finance OCA and a Planning OCA due to be presented, both of which we've notified to committee services. And also we're developing a new workforce strategy, so that's likely to be an agenda item on the 29th of September, workforce strategy update. As far as I'm aware, the next few dates are as per the committee papers. The only other additional items I would add would be to the 16th of February 2023, where we would normally have the ethnicity pay gap and the foundation real living wage on that committee as well. So that's the committee where I do a lot of talking normally. I think that's it as far as I'm aware at this point. Obviously, we can update month by month as we go through the committees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any comments on the work programme? No? Okay.
Chair, can I just come back to that 13th of July?
Of course.
Please.
Yeah.
What items? Are we moving items from that? Sorry, are we moving items from that meeting to the 5th of September? Is that what you said?
Yes. One item, the Family Partnership Service, OCA, I've been informed that that item won't be coming to the 13th of July. They're scheduling that for the 5th of September. Yeah. But the two items that you should have on the agenda for the 13th of July are the social media policy and the work-related stress and employee wellbeing policy. But I will know over the next week whether those items are going to be are coming or not. Actually, I think the deadline is probably Tuesday, Eunice, isn't it? I think for titles. So we'll do our very best to meet that deadline for you. I mean that there'll be no meeting on the 13th of July. Okay.
Well, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I think that draws this meeting to a close. So thank you, Anne, for still being here, and thank the three of you for coming.